Welcome to Intimacy Play, a podcast by Pleasy Play. We host open discussions with world-leading experts on couples, sex, and intimacy, so you can build a more exciting, fun, and intimate relationship. I'm your host, Mikaela Silva. Hi everyone! So today we have an awesome guest with us. Her name is Lina Bembe. So Lina is a porn performer and director. She's a TEDx speaker, an educator at the Sex School Hub, and a writer for Clue, which is a science-backed period tracker. Hello Lina, how are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So tell us how this all started. How and why did you start working in the sexual industry?
I don't know. I don't think there's much story to it. I moved to Berlin a number of years ago, and I found out that here in Berlin, there were like certain spaces that were open to pornography of kinds that were very different to the usual things that I could find on the internet, you know? So I don't know, like one day, like something inside of me told me, oh, maybe I could be part of all of this. And it was just very easy. Being in Berlin and being able to reach out to people, to meet in person, to be able to find out how they work and to think for myself, okay, will this be something that I could do? Yes or no? And it turned out that it could. And yeah, I'm still here.
That's so interesting. Can you tell us, the ins and outs of being a porn performer, the good, the bad, and what makes you still be in that industry that sometimes is badly viewed? And I think you bring such a fresh view to it and such a positive one.
Thank you. Well, I think that's just like, to a relative extent, I think that doing porn is like many other jobs, there are things that are good about it. There are things that are not good about it. There are things that definitely need to change, but there are other things that are really worth the effort of doing it. I think that the toughest part about doing this is the degree of stigma or the amount of like cliches that are around this kind of industry that make it really difficult for people who want to make a living out of this, who make it like all the time questions of censorship, make it really difficult for people like us to make a living out of it, and will also put obstacles to having proper conversations about the industry and hopefully demystifying it. And so I think those are like the most difficult bits of what we do. And I think, in general, I do like what I do a lot. I think that personally, it has brought me lots of satisfactions. I am convinced that this is something that I really like to do, but it's definitely not easy.
Oh, I understand. And the way that you were saying that, there's a lot of issues surrounding this industry, although it is just a job like any other job. Can you tell us how the fact that people, view this as something wrong has to do with sex education? I know you have a very strong leader role in talking about sex education, helping, shape the new generation and the millennials as well in sex education. So can you tell us a little bit about how the sex education that you had shaped you and maybe what has changed in between that?
Well, I think my sex education, I think it's a typical story of the inadequate sex education, that you receive at early ages. It's the typical thing that you learn at school, when sex education, it's all about pregnancies, horrible STDs, images, and all like this excessively heteronormative bias, and where you are left with lots of questions, where you learn certain things, but then you realize that have nothing to do with the kind of like questions that you have about yourself or how your life goes or what kind of like things are going on in your life, So, in many ways, like the kind of sex education that I received in my early years, like had nothing to do with the kind of like, with my life at the moment and my life in my adult years. And I think that when you do pornography or other kinds of sex work, you are like very much like facing on these issues about sex, sexuality, and sometimes even relationships. And in so many ways, you find out that you can actually have like lots of insights about these topics. Of course, not from a certified sex educator perspective, but there's definitely a lot that you learn through pornography, because you're forced to properly learn about things like sexual health, about how to deal with people, about how to communicate, about the importance of boundaries, and all these things are really important, and then all of these are like certain skills that you can hardly ever learn in, at least in your early years of sex education, or what people usually know as sex education.
Completely. And I agree. So you touched on specific points, saying that the education that is given in schools primarily is weak, and it focuses on pregnancy and on the bad things, and not on learning about yourself, your partner, and what you can do to have pleasure. So what do you think has changed from your times to now, and what would you like to change?
I think that at this point, because of the internet, like, helps a lot in putting like certain tools out there, for getting information that it's missing sometimes, that it's missing either from family environments or from school environments and so on. So I'm really happy to see that the internet, it's like more and more welcoming place to find information about sex, sexuality, and sex education, that it's also age appropriate, I think there's a number of platforms that are like focused on adolescent groups, and there are also other platforms that are more like focused towards adults, which it's also something funny. We hardly ever think about the fact that adults also need sex education, I think from my perspective, because I am first and foremost a porn performer, for me, I would like for people to see, to change their minds about what pornography is, to have like more information at hand about the things that pornography is, the things that pornography isn't, the things that need definitely to change within pornography, but also all like these problems that are within porn to be seen from a realistic perspective, and not like from this kind of like myths and like scare tactics and all like this shame and taboo halo with which pornography is seen.
Can you elaborate on that? So what is pornography, and how should it be viewed in your opinion?
Well, I think that pornography first and foremost shouldn't be seen from this kind of like perspective of misinformation that there is around. And especially with the angle of sex education, people just like say, oh, like kids and young people learn first from pornography. So pornography is sex, it's the sex education of our children and so on. And because of this reason, porn, it's not sex education. And because of this reason, porn is just bad, And I think it's just like throwing like this sort of like preconceptions about porn, that it is that it's denigrating, that it's sexist, that it's racist, that people who get into porn are somehow some sort of like mentally ill deviants with lots of traumas, that everyone is dodgy within this industry and so on. So I think that people should just have, first of all, people should be able to decide for themselves whether pornography is not a good thing. It's not bring something to their lives or not, because it's also very valid not to like porn. But people should, I think that they just need to have like more information about what this industry really is, and to make their own minds about it, but without like throwing all this bunch of prejudices about it, without pulling further like the shame about sex and sexual relationships, because in so many ways, just like shaming porn, it's an indirect way of also shaming sex, because at the end of the day, a lot of pornography, it's explicit depictions of sex and sexuality. So yeah, I guess just that shaming it, like vilifying it, or just like pointing at it as a scapegoat doesn't bring anything to anyone.
But are you in general happy with the porn that is available for the majority of people? Or do you think that, there is a lot of better porn, but people just need to pay for the content, which is, completely justified. You pay for Netflix like you pay for anything else. So why shouldn't you pay for good porn? Do you think that it's a matter of paying and having a good output? Or do you think that all porn is good as long as you see it in the right perspective?
I think that in so many ways, more than, I think it's more fruitful to think rather than like it's like certain porn good or bad. I think that first and foremost we should be able to understand that porn is a reflection of our society, you know. So in so many ways, like, I mean, there are many things that could be fruitful within pornography that we could bring in our lives, but at the same time, like the things that are wrong within certain pornographic narratives, they're also um, a product of what we are as a society. Like our society is racist. There's racist porn. Our society, it's pretty much misogynistic. There is misogynistic porn, and so on and so forth. So I think that it's not only like the porn industry to blame for whatever products or whatever narrative should not be there. I think that porn doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is informed by the people who consume it as well. And I think it's also, there are like certain, and porn in so many ways is also a number of fantasies, you know? So it's also like this idea that people also should be able to understand like this dimension of fantasy, you know, and also come to terms with the shame that comes with certain fantasies. Because let's say, for example, someone watches like some kinds of like hardcore pornography. One may think like, oh my God, this is that they're really that kind of porn because look at all this violence, look at this, look at that. But then you don't know, for example, if that specific kind of scene, under what terms it was made, you know, because it could have been the case that it was done ethically, that everyone consented about what they were doing, that everyone's properly informed and has the adequate skills to do that. And if that informs like very specific fantasies, that precisely because they're fantasies, that doesn't mean that they're going to become reality. I do not see anything that could be wrong with that, you know. And it can, for example, be the case that someone sees like this kind of like new pornography that people love to label as ethical or feminist, and you see that it's more like beautifully done, you know, glossy images and everything, and everything looks like beautiful and respectful and so on and so forth. But then what if that kind of work was made under conditions that weren't adequate for the people involved in it? So again, like, where is the good, where is the bad, you know? Of course, there are certain things about the industry that definitely need to change. I think there are many mechanisms within who controls like what the most part of what's available there. Questions about piracy are super important. Questions about like consent, and also questions also about what informing yourself about what the industry is, so that you as a worker also are more protected, you know. So I think that there is definitely a lot that needs to change, you know. Not everything is fair, but I think that we do ourselves a favor by thinking about what exact points need to change within the industry or should be good, whether it is from a consumer perspective than a producer perspective.
I love the comparison that you made, and for me it makes it so clear, which is there's offer and there's demand. So if society is misogynistic or racist, obviously there's going to be a demand for that, and there's going to be somebody that's going to offer it, which is not necessarily the fault of that industry. It's the fault of society as a whole. Thank you. That was a very interesting comparison, and I completely agree with that view, because in
Thank
all
you.
industries and everything in life, there are perspectives which we don't agree, but that doesn't mean that the industry itself is a bad one. So yes, I think that's eye-opening. I hope everybody listens to that very carefully before, starting to shame the industry and people who are in the industry. And you were talking about, that porn can be also beneficial. How do you think that porn can be transformed into a more educational tool, or should it be?
I think that I would say more than true. I think that porn can be educational. I think that if like porn producers and directors decide that they just want to focus on doing fantasies and things that have perhaps little to no connection to reality, that's perfectly fine. And I think that people who also put their minds into doing work that can reflect certain dimension of real life sex and sexuality, that's also perfectly fine. And I think that in so many ways, it's important. I will say it's really important for us to be more attuned to what elements about pornography can be applied to real life and what cannot, you know, in so many ways, because pornography, it's one of the few mediums in which that depict sexuality in an explicit way. I think that in so many ways there is potential to learn a lot from it, you know, in the sense like when you receive, for example, sex education, and then you just see like that everything is just like going or like hiding genitals or hiding like or like really like skipping like the most like important parts or the parts that eventually you feel the most curious about. I think then you go and you see them in porn, you know. So I guess there is a lot of potential there for us to be able to detect like what kind of things we could eventually learn from. And it's about, I don't know, questions of safety, questions of consent, questions of like, let's say, sexualities that fall outside of heteronormativity, you know, body diversity as well. So I think that all those elements that are present in specific kind of pornographies are already doing the job. And I think that in so many ways, it's super important just to have like more about, to talk more about this potential and not just say like, oh, porn, it's not sex education, end of the story, because that's just not true. And many people do pornography with pretty educational purposes. So it already exists.
I love that. And I think you've managed also to do that very specifically. I wouldn't call it porn, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But the way that the Sex School Hub was created, you know, in order to show things but what they are. So you are showing the genitals because you are teaching about sex and about sexuality. So can you explore a little bit about the Sex School Hub, what it means and what it is? Because I found it so interesting, and there's so many interesting contents there that I think everybody, especially adults that are already in relationships and think they know everything, I think they're going to learn a thing or two.
Well, Sex School Hub was founded by Anarela Martinez Madrid. She's a producer and cultural manager. I am part of the core team of performers and educators. And one of the most interesting aspects about Sex School is that it is a platform that brings together that knowledge of sex workers of different kinds, film directors that also are used to working with pornography, and also certified sex therapists, coaches, and educators. So with this in mind, the idea behind Sex School is to create different kinds of content, but mostly sexually explicit films that have an educational approach. In this sense, what we want to do is to show like the full picture about specific sex topics without like feeling ashamed of nudity, genitals, or sexual situations, and at the same time deliver them in ways that are approachable, in ways that are relatable, you know, and without making it sound like a sex manual that it's difficult to understand. Or so it's more about focus on what will a real life interaction, what could a real life interaction look like. So I think that applying the knowledge of people who are specialized in sex education and putting it in the hands of sex workers to perform in it, people who already have like the skills about when it comes to negotiation, consent, or safer sex practices, and who also are not shy of showing it, and also putting it together with the skills of talented film directors. In this case, Poppy Sanchez is the director. I think that it is possible to create a product that is fresh in many ways and hopefully helpful for people who have all these questions about sex and sexuality still unanswered.
I completely agree with you, because I think the platform is amazing. In terms of sex education, because that's what it is, the platform is sex education for adults. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Do you think there should be this type of platform for children? Maybe less explicit, but you know, that saying things by the name and showing how things should be and how people should be aware of, yes, getting pregnant. Yes, there are diseases, but yes, there's this other 90% of the sexuality, which is pleasure, which is knowing yourself, which is consent, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that there's a need for that in the market?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that sex education can be, and there should be like sex education that it's age appropriate, you know, and there's no such thing as a specific age in which people can start learning about sex, because I think that children can be sexual in many ways. Of course, you're not going to show them the same content that you show to teenagers or adults, but for example, one of the most important topics that children could learn, it's questions of consent, let's say. I think that it's a super important topic, and I think that for as long as you make things age appropriate, that makes them understandable and so on, I think it's incredibly important to have sex education, especially at young tender ages, in which kids or teenagers are even more vulnerable, could be more vulnerable to abuse and so on. So it's just a matter of like making it appropriate. It's also a matter of like demystifying things and of understanding that sex education is necessary at all ages.
I love what you said, especially when you're talking about demystifying things, because every time that I do a podcast and I talk to somebody that's so much more knowledgeable than I am, that's in whatever industry that it is. So if it's a therapist or a sex worker, you know, a lot of people surrounding the sexual wellness industry really showed me and made me learn that consent not only is one of the most important things, but above all, it's actually more present in every single thing and every single person, I mean, in this industry than in the average Joe and Jane next door, which is mind-boggling. Why weren't we taught about consent and what that means? Consent can be, can I kiss you? That doesn't need to be anything else than that or anything further, but why shouldn't people? That's incredible for me.
Exactly. And then you realize how important that is and how like you carry all this lack of education and consent like way into your adult years, and then you're not able to. And then until like you start learning a little bit more about what it is and not, then you just like go back into your early lives, and then you realize like all these situations that could have required boundaries, firm boundaries around consent.
Yes, I remember the TEDx talk that you gave. And one of the examples that you gave was when you were filming a threesome video and how it works for the Sex School Hub, and how you stopped just to have a chat, to have something to eat, and to talk about consent. Am I correct?
Yeah, definitely. We checked in with each other. We just made a pause. We had some water and so on. We checked in with each other. We talk about, okay, are you still okay? We continue with this. Yes, no. How are you feeling? And so on and so forth. Definitely. Yeah.
It's interesting to me because even, you know, has a professional that knows what they're doing, you're still checking for that consent, and that should be transported to real life. And you said something also on the TEDx that really stuck with me, and that was sex is everywhere, yet all the conversations around this in the world are difficult. Why is that? What is your opinion? Why can't people talk openly about sex and about issues and explore sexuality in a healthy manner?
Well, because sex is taboo at the end of the day. Like, I think sex is everywhere. Like, there's so many, we sexualize so many bodies, we sexualize everything. But at the same time, we, as a society, I mean, our societies, our governments, our corporations don't want us to face or have like more open conversations about sex and sexuality, because in so many ways the taboo about sex can fit the current system of capitalism that we live in. If everyone had the choice of being more free about their sexuality, if everyone had the choice to be more free about how they want to live their sex lives, how many people do they want to date, if they want to marry, if they don't want to marry, like how they want to have their relationships, if they want to have kids or no, if everyone just like started to have like more free choices around all these topics, I think that will in so many ways have a dent in how we understand and assume productivity, about, oh, but you have to have a job. Oh, but you have to breathe taxpayers. Oh, but you have to stay in wed marriage because that makes it more like productive, and so on and so forth. So I think that there are many underlying reasons of why sex is still a taboo, and I think there's plenty of reasons, or there's plenty of years and centuries of reinforcing these ideas about sex being something you have to be scared about sex being something that only serves the matters of reproduction. And that's it. All these questions about what certain ideas of what it is to be promiscuous or deviant are wrong or should not be, and you shouldn't do them. So because of that, we're just used to not talking about sex. And because of that, we just miss so many conversations that could be really important on an individual level.
Interesting. Your view is very interesting, especially because I hadn't tied up the fact that, the society is maybe heteronormative, and maybe we can explain a little bit more what that means for everybody that doesn't know. But maybe society is that because society or governments have to gain with that. That's a very interesting view. Could you maybe explain a little bit better? I think you'd be much better than I am, what cisnormative is and what that means and why it shouldn't be?
I mean, it's just what it's usually known as cis heteronormativity is this idea that makes cis people who are heterosexual, who are invested or interested in monogamous partnerships, the norm or the rule of what is normal and accepted. So that's basically it. And of course, many rules, many society norms, many even bureaucratic expectations or bureaucratic rules and so on depend of this idea that you either must be cisgender, that you must be heterosexual, that you only are supposed to that you are either single or just in one sort of relationship or in one marriage that is expected to last till the end of times. So of course, that's just one way of seeing the world, of perceiving yourself or of wanting to live your life. But in so many ways, so many rules around it make it a certain norm. And if you decide to live your way differently, then you start finding many obstacles. You start finding out in so many ways marginalized and affected by not choosing to be that way. So that's why you add this part of normative or normativity.
Talking about that in regulations, do you think that, the fact that there is not a lack of regulation, but a struggle in regulating correctly pornography, both for creation and the distribution, do you think that also has to do with how governments perceive it and the lack of that?
Yeah, that's absolutely. I think I would say it's both government and corporations. And think in these ways it goes hand in hand, because government creates the rules and corporations are the ones that give you all the infrastructure of having a business or getting paid or making a living out of it. So it is absolutely and 100% how the porn industry functions these days or doesn't function. It's definitely a product of their set of rules that governments and corporations put in place. And I would say that in so many ways, it is highly regulated. I think that perhaps if you get the impression that because you can get into a tube site and see lots of weird clips or dodgy films and so on, you might think that it's so anarchy and chaos and so on. I think that's not true. I think that, for example, when you make pornography, if you want to establish yourself as a director or as a producer in pornography, you really have to go through lots of rules about how to document your own work, how to prove that the people who are working for you are consenting people of legal age. You pay taxes. But for example, like if because your line of business is pornography and so on, you have like you're also subject to eternal censorship. You're also subject to eternal like sudden changes of rules. You're also subject to payment processors and fees for payment processors, fees for hosting, for being like very, very high, and you also see yourself that that you are only allowed to exist in very specific places. So there is definitely lots of control. There is definitely lots of regulations, and all of these they are like progressively increasing, and I think many of them are quite unfair, and many of them are made in the name of like protecting minors for watching content, or made like also with this bias about sex and sexuality being like taboo and so on. And they make our lives more difficult, but more importantly, they also make these courses around sex and sexuality more and more taboo.
On a positive note, so we're talking about the regulations and how hard it is to, talk about sexuality in a free way. At the same time, there's a positive side, I think, which is the fact that people are talking more about that, and that there are platforms now allowing people to be more independent, like OnlyFans, for example. I know you have an OnlyFans account.
Yes.
How do you feel that empowers women women and men, by the way, and anybody with that identifies with any gender or any neutral gender? How do you feel that people can be empowered by something like OnlyFans?
I think that OnlyFans at this point, it's one of the few platforms to which sex workers or people who want to work around explicit sexuality have access. I think that OnlyFans is a product, it's capitalizing from the increasing censorship that has been going on in other platforms. For example, many years ago, Tumblr used to allow explicit content, and they banned it, and now like Tumblr, it's basically death. Platforms so like Patreon, for example, used to allow some explicit content, and there used to be quite profitable for people who used to put their content there. But then again, because of certain laws passed in the United States, they had to change their policies, So many people were also left out of their income with that. Some clip stores, for example, like IndieBill, that used to be good for certain people who were selling them content, also like closed, and now you are like left out to other platforms that take a bigger cut on your sales and so on. And of course, like not to say, for example, the rules that Facebook has around anything remotely sexual, and in consequence, Instagram, for example, that even like bans content that it's conversations that are about, for example, queerness and so on. It's not even about being like, not even about explicit sex or anything. It's about being queer and so on. And for example, at this point, like Instagram doesn't even let you advertise your work or even talk about your work. So I think that when all like these, there's like so many places that are like that have been like progressively encroaching, all these conversations about sex and sexuality. And at this point, OnlyFans has been successful in being like a platform for many people to make their lives in. But that doesn't mean that it is guaranteed forever and ever that OnlyFans will remain sex worker or explicit content friendly. So, of course, definitely it's super important because especially now, like with these times in which we're in the pandemic and so on, because it does like provide like an avenue for many people to profit from their explicit content, and they are like tolerating lots of explicit content and so on. So that definitely it's an avenue for independence, and definitely an avenue for of capitalizing, on your body. But I think that as such, platforms can be helpful, but the platforms in itself, they do not empower sex workers, because I think that as a person, if you live from this, you jump from platform to platform thinking that in so many ways your days are could be numbered, and now you're doing good, but tomorrow they can announce that they are changing their terms of service and you're out of business. You are invisible. You have to find another way. And unfortunately, in these times, censorship, it's increasing and increasing and increasing.
Yeah, we need to change that, definitely. We're also trying that, with Pleasy Play. And we just talk about relationships and we empower couples. And we have seen bans on adverts talking about how to improve a relationship.
Yes.
It's mind-boggling.
100%.
It's crazy.
Yes. For example, sex school cannot advertise at all with any sort on social media. And for example, even the handle of Sex School Hub, we could not put that on our Facebook address because it's the word sex. You cannot use the word sex at all these days.
It seems like the more open we are, the more closed off we can also get.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got so much experience. You've got so many interesting views on sexuality and on empowering people and couples and everybody on having a better sexuality. I would love it if you could share the 3 best tips for people, either single or in a relationship. How can they empower their own sexuality or their sexuality in a couple?
It's all about building skills, and I think that one of the most important things comes with self-knowledge, getting to know how you feel about yourself, what kind of things you need, how can you feel pleasure, or what kind of things work for you, or what kind of things do not work for you. So in so many ways, the most important relationship we will always have is with ourselves. So the more we work on them, the more we cultivate, the more we know ourselves, it can definitely help with our relationships and stuff. So definitely that. I think also boundaries and consent, it's a super important aspect, of whether you are single or whether you are in a relationship, new or long term. It's really important to have boundaries, to, once you know yourself, to know exactly what kind of things you can do, what kind of things you don't want to do, what kind of things you can tolerate, what kind of things you cannot, what situations, what type of you could negotiate, and so on. So definitely people who have coming into relationships without boundaries, or trying or not knowing the value of boundaries and then trying to violate other people's boundaries, can definitely be potentially harmful, either for oneself or for other person's partner or your partner, and so on. And I think the other skill that it's super important to build is communication. I think that it's often said, communication is key. Communication is key. Communicate with your partner, communicate here and there. But it is just like this, like communication is just like this very massive topic, that for which many people do not have skills, or whose skills are always, you can always like improve them, And I think that's also like another big area in which everyone can work on, whether as an individual or also as a couple, and definitely being able to express what you need and how you feel, be able to listen to what other people feel and need. It's incredibly important to make the best of whatever relationship you enter, or just to also be able to be more selective in a positive or healthy way about what kind of relationships or what kind of people you hook up with or relate to, and so on.
So as a recap, you would say 1, know yourself, know your body.
Yeah, self-knowledge. 2, boundaries. And 3, communication.
Amazing.
Those
Amazing.
3.
Make total sense to me. As a last note, so something that we are very keen on is helping couples to build a better and stronger relationship. I know we were talking about just now, the top 3 tips to be well with yourself and have a better sexuality. Do you have anything specific for couples, how to make the relationship itself more exciting and intimate?
I think that it goes again, like back to these 3 bits, know what first of all, know yourself so that you know what you want and what you need. Enter, communicate, and enter like these communication rounds with taking into place that boundaries are important, So I think that like these three elements just like require like lots of trial and error, it requires lots of patience, lots of like exercising. And so lots of like, exercising, like hands on, this is not something that you just like read about and then just like, oh yeah, I got it, I will do it. It's like, you need to, roll your sleeves and get into it. I guess that for each couple, it's up to them to figure out how they would like to approach it, because for example, like, I don't know, like intimacy can look very different for each person, maybe people just really need cuddles, but for other people, they find more intimate, like very deep conversations, or like sharing other different activities or situations. I will not be sure if there's like a very specific thing, but I think that's getting yourself, like deprogramming yourself from the idea that just feeling love for someone or just like feeling certain affinity with someone will solve things. It's more about, okay, what kind of skills do I need to build? What kind of like effort? What kind of things we need to work on to be able to be better together or adjust our expectations and so on. It's a big question.
No, but it makes total sense, and I agree with your vision. I just wanted to share a question that we have from one of our followers in social media. So we did nudge them, saying that we were going to have a very special guest that was a porn performer and a director in this industry, and we just said, tell us what you would like to know from somebody that's an expert in the area. Interestingly enough, of course, a lot of the questions I'm not going to tell them. They're very just weird questions that everybody tries to get. Well, let's not say weird. Let's say quirky, I would say. But one of them actually popped up a couple of times. And that was, me and my partner want to go and start a threesome. What would be the fundamental things that we should be thinking about before we try this? And I thought this was a very interesting question because it's very easy in the heat of the moment to try something and then regret it. So I'd love to know your tips specifically on before you do that, what you should think about, what you should talk about. We talked about consent, communication. If you could explore that as a last question, I would love it.
I think the most important thing will be very clear, is to be very clear about what exactly you expect. I mean, I'm assuming, let's just say, for example, because that's also very important about like, first of all, make sure that both partners want that threesome, because it's like the typical question of like, oh, how can I convince my girlfriend to have a threesome with another girl? That's when you start with how can I convince, it's like, okay, no, you should not do this. So that doesn't sound too consensual if you have to convince someone about doing something they probably already say they might not want to. So let's just assume that we are departing from the point in which both partners are really convinced that they want to have a threesome. I think that before that, I think it will be really important just to be very clear about what expectations you have with that threesome, in the sense of like, not just like, oh yeah, I want to have fun and so on. I think it's super important just like to really break it down into very specific elements, It's okay, I want to have, let's just say, oh, I want to feel pleasure, of course, but I want to have like this kind of sex, or I want to do this and then do that, I want to be able, let's just say, to continue in communication with the third wheel, or to be clear about, okay, yeah, I just want it to be like a one-time off, like end of story, It's to be also very clear about and again, we go with like consented boundaries about what kind of things are both partners fine, with doing or not. Let's just say like, I don't know, like one partner, it's like, okay, I want penetrative sex to be only between us two and not the third wheel, So something like that. Also, like what kind of like things could even go wrong, Let's talk, for example, about jealousy. What do we do if, for example, one of us feels jealous? What can we keep like in check with each other,
Safe words maybe could help.
It could be like safe words, but it also could be just like taking a break, It could be also just saying, what, I might feel jealous if this and this happens, so also then you just avoid it. So just like really like kind of specific questions, kind of potential scenarios, but also not take that for granted, like, again, you're continuously checking with your partner. And also definitely questions about safer sex need to be taken into account. It's about like what safer sex methods are you going to have at hand? Okay, it's definitely going to be condoms, it's definitely going to be gloves or lube, and all these things also need to be taken into account. So definitely before jumping into any sort of threesome activity that we are assuming that it's like consented by both parties, it's to be like super, super, super exhaustive and extensive about all like these things that you need to be prepared for to be able to jump into it from a perspective that could be potentially pleasurable and safe as well. And that also safe also like both for the couple and also for the third person that could potentially enter a threesome. So then you just like focus on the fun and have the least amount of surprises possible.
That feedback and insights was very, very interesting because I think it can be applied to a lot of things, not just the threesome. So make sure that you talk about it, that you know what you're expecting, that you have actual consent for what's going on, and you try and figure it out. If something goes wrong, what could it be and what we could be doing? I love that.
100%.
Lina, I've loved your view and I've learned so much with you, not just from this call, but of course from everything that you do on social media. So where can people find you and know more about everything that you talk about?
At the moment, I have my social media channels. It's either twitter.com or instagram.com or onlyfans.com/Lina Bembe. All together, LINABEMBE. So yeah, you can find me both on Twitter, Instagram for the usual stuff, but like the most important bits are definitely on OnlyFans.
And the content is pretty good on the social medias that I have access to. So yes, give a follow to Lina. You'll learn a lot. And above all, you'll be more open to discussing consent, hopefully, and enjoying a better and more open relationship, whatever that means and feels for you and your relationship. Thanks so much, Lina. It's been a pleasure. I've loved talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
And that was Intimacy Play. We hope you enjoyed it. To find out more about Pleasy and how we can take your relationship to the next level, visit pleasyplay.com. Then also make sure to search for Intimacy Play in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Pleasy, thank you for listening.